All right, today on the Draft America podcast, we're just going to touch on a couple of American League teams. This is a pretty wide open American League, kind of the way it was last year. And as we've watched the Yankees struggle, I will argue this to the death that last year the Yankees, in my opinion, won the American League by default. Yes, they had Juan Soto and they had a healthy Garrett Cole. They also had a clear path to the World Series. Detroit took out Houston. We know Houston has had the Yankees number in the playoffs, and then Detroit has had the Yankees number in the playoffs. Those two teams combined to go 7-0 this century against the Yankees in the postseason, and then Cleveland took out Detroit. So the path to the World Series last year for the Yankees was a Kansas City team that overachieved and hadn't been to the postseason in 9 years, and then an overachieving Cleveland team that relied very heavily on its bullpen to get to the American League Championship Series. And that just allowed the Yankees to get to the World Series and make a fool of themselves, where they, dropped a fly ball, where they didn't cover first base, where they had to use Nestor Cortez to try to close out game one of the World Series. I mean, it was almost inevitable that the Yankees were going to get run over in that World Series. And so, looking at the American League this year and the Yankees, I will say this with full confidence: the Yankees are not going to the World Series this year. They're not. So that begs the question: who may be going to the World Series out of the American League? Well, we've seen the Red Sox get really hot and surge past the Yankees, and within striking distance of the American League lead. But two teams that we saw Detroit early in the year, and they've kind of slipped, and the Blue Jays and the Mariners have risen towards the top of the ranks. So I'm going to touch on the Blue Jays first. And the big question for me, anyway, is does this Blue Jays pitching staff have enough to make a real run in October, and specifically the bullpen? Well, yesterday was brutal and potentially catastrophic as the Blue Jays survived the Dodgers there in the ninth inning and managed to avoid the sweep, as Jeff Hoffman had a day that I don't know that I've ever seen a major league reliever have. He pitched 2/3 of an inning, didn't give up a hit, didn't get a strikeout. That's not unusual, but he walked 5 batters. He threw 33 pitches and only 10 were strikes. And it was young Mason Fluharty, I pronounce it right, that had to come on to get the save. Fluharty had a great start to the year. He'd been struggling of late, really struggling of late. He saves the day, but the question is this sustainable this season for the Blue Jays? I mean, do they really have? I would say the pitching staff as a whole. It's fair to wonder if the pitching staff is good enough to really make a run in October. And let's look at the bullpen numbers. They're not as bad as maybe you would think, or as bad as I'm making them seem. Blue Jays bullpen is actually tied for fourth in batting average against with 226. Overall, 13th in ERA at 406. They've thrown the ninth most innings among relievers. They're tied for seventh in WHIP. So some of the overall numbers are pretty good. But in the last 15 days, the Blue Jays pitching staff as a whole has pitched to a 5.81 ERA. That is the third worst in all of baseball in that span. And some of the individual struggles in the bullpen, in particular, have been pretty prominent. Mason Fluharty, who I just mentioned, his last 4 games, 8.31 ERA. Brendan Little, 12 ERA over his last 4 games. Sir Anthony Dominguez, who was really the one big trade acquisition they got for their bullpen, in 6 games with the Blue Jays, 9.64 ERA. And then Yariel Rodriguez, his last 3 games, how about 16.88? Now, Hoffman's numbers recently have been solid, but hard to not have some recency bias based on that rough performance yesterday that Fluharty bailed him out of. So when you look at the Blue Jays comparatively to the other teams in the American League, certainly they've got a great lineup. They have a solid starting rotation, if not, one that lacks an ace. But my question is whether they can hold leads. Is this sustainable in terms of, kind of patching it together with relievers who are either wearing down or the league is figuring them out. I would say that if I have one major concern about the Blue Jays as to why they may not make a run, it's not so much what the overall season numbers of the bullpen and pitching staff tell me, but it's what's happening recently, even during this run. And I don't think there's any team, even as good as the Dodgers, even maybe the 27 Yankees, that can simply say, we're going to just slug our way past pitching struggles through October. It just never works that way. And so, again, I point out that stat about innings pitched. What really shocks me is the Los Angeles Dodgers have 29 more innings pitched from their bullpen than any other team. Does it add up? Does it hurt them in the postseason because of the wear and tear? I don't know. I mean, they have an absurdly good starting rotation that they may be able to work with that and use starters in the bullpen. The Blue Jays don't have that luxury. So I would refrain from calling the Blue Jays the best team in the American League because of that. And how much do you trust Jeff Hoffman to close games? And if not Hoffman, we've seen teams over the years have closers who suddenly struggle, and they turn to the next guy. And does that next guy step up and become a postseason hero, or does it just become a revolving door of relievers and just praying that you can get through those high leverage innings? And so while it was a great win yesterday, I think that game in particular highlighted potential struggles of the bullpen. And in particular, this was a litmus test series for the Blue Jays, which, I don't want to say they completely failed. They lost 2 out of 3, but they showed some cracks in the foundation. Now, that may beg the question as we segue here to who is the best team in the American League. And I can't believe I'm about to utter these words, and it's simply a question, perhaps a rhetorical question. Are the Seattle Mariners the best team in the American League? I cannot believe I'm saying these words. They are still a half game out as we speak in the American League West behind the Houston Astros, but they have won 7 in a row. Their offense appears rejuvenated with the additions of Eugenio Suarez and before that, Josh Naylor. In years past, it's always felt like the Mariners just don't have enough offensive firepower. That may not be the case this year. You may be well aware by now that Cal Raleigh is leading the majors with 45 homers and is on pace to set the record for home runs by a catcher. The Mariners as a team are third in home runs, got 171. They're 10th in runs scored, 547. They're tied for 11th with a 321 on base percentage, and they're third in stolen bases with 125. Now that's the good. The bad, they're 19th overall in batting average, 243. It's never felt like the Mariners have been a great batting average team. And perhaps the most concerning stat of all, they are second to last in all of baseball in hitting with runners in scoring position. They are a 227 team with runners in scoring position. That's better only than the Chicago White Sox, who, by the way, the Mariners just swept, but it was kind of a tough series. Mariners in recent years have been a lot about pitching. Well, this year, they're 8th in bullpen ERA, 3.63, and they're 11th in starters ERA, 3.92. And mind you, they've done it despite absences at times this year from George Kirby and Logan Gilbert and Bryce Miller, who Miller pitched to a 2.94 ERA last year in 31 starts. He had a rough go of it this year, 5.73 in 10 starts. Then he hit the IL with an elbow issue, and he is currently rehabbing. They're hoping he'll be back within the next couple weeks. In terms of other players that they're looking to get back, probably around September, Victor Robles, who fractured his shoulder, and Luke Raley, who had back spasms. Raley's numbers were not very good, but we know he's a big power bat. Both of those guys give at least some depth in the lineup. Robles brings an element of speed. Raley brings an element of power. The question is just whether the Mariners can confidently feel like they're better than the rest of the American League. We know how hot the Red Sox have been, but there's that prevailing feeling that they're a young team that's ahead of schedule. The Astros are certainly going to have something to say about this, as they've won, the last 7 full season American League West titles. and these teams will play once more. They'll have one series remaining in later September in Houston. They are 5-5 as far as the head-to-head this year. The schedule is worth pointing out. The Mariners, 12 of their next 18 games are above teams over 500. That will close out August. But then they finish with 19 out of 25 games against teams 500 or less, or one game over, which is St. Louis. Now, the Astros, on the other hand, have a pretty soft schedule the rest of the way. 29 of their remaining 45 games are against teams same 500 or less, or a game over 500, which in this case is Texas. As we mentioned, that they'll meet head-to-head one more time. The Astros bullpen, once again, really good. The Astros getting healthier. Christian Javier will be activated tonight for his season debut. Carlos Correa, all of a sudden, is having fun playing baseball again. They picked up Jesus Sanchez, and oh, by the way, they're waiting to get back Yordan Alvarez, and Jake Myers, for that matter. So I don't know if stacked is the right word. I did hear Correa use that word. But the Astros, once again, they're inevitable. They're going to be in the postseason. Can the Mariners catch them for the division? We'll see. But you're going to have to deal with Houston. And again, I don't know if Houston, at least right now, is the best team in the American League. But I think they are the scariest because of their history, because of what their roster is shaping up to look like now. And so Seattle is going to have its hands full. It's going to need to get big-time offensive production down the stretch. It's going to need to, get the dominance that it feels it can have from its starting rotation. But it is at least a fair question to ask. And the Mariners have won 7 straight ball games, but they're about to go into a pretty tough stretch right here. And the one thing I'll mention, too, about Seattle come playoff time that could be a very interesting thing to keep your eye on. So remember the Phillies when they made the World Series 3 years ago in 2022. That was the first time the Phillies had been to the postseason at all in 11 years, since 2011. And we know what Philly fans are. Love them or hate them. We know they're passionate, and they're going to come out in full throat. And the Phillies just, I believe, had one of the better home field advantages that I've seen in recent years throughout the postseason. I think they really fed off of that crowd, and they were dominant at home. In fact, they didn't lose a home playoff game until Game 4 of the World Series that year. And I mention that because I think Seattle, a Mariners fan base, starved for some kind of postseason baseball. The only taste they've had since that 2001 team, that epic 2001 team, was 2022. They got one home game. They got to see their team lose 1-0 in 18 innings to the eventual champion Astros. They did win that wild card series in Toronto before being swept out of the division series. So you think about the possibility of playoff baseball in Seattle and how charged and electric that atmosphere is. You heard the Padres talk about it too when they beat the Dodgers in 2022. They talked about just how juiced that crowd was and how much they fed off of that. And I think Seattle, more than maybe any other fan base, at least in the American League, I think you can make a case for Boston because they haven't seen a ton of postseason baseball since 18, just the one appearance. And you can make a case for Detroit, which, last year got its first taste of the postseason in, a decade. But, you think about, and Toronto, in fairness, Toronto as well. But you think about Houston, they're every year. They've not actually been good at home in the postseason. They've been on the wrong side of history a couple times, losing 4 games in one postseason series. No team had ever done that. No other team has ever done that. The Astros have done it twice. So they have not had that home field advantage in October. The Yankees, I feel like if the Yankees get in, they're the kind of team where their crowd is just as likely to turn on them as it is to be, a guiding force. So I think that the home field advantage factor could be huge for Seattle. I'm not saying that alone is going to elevate them from maybe the best team to the best team, but this is a more exciting Mariners team than we've seen in years past. It's a team that can hit, that can slug, still has good pitching. pitching that is going to get boosted potentially by the return of a healthy Bryce Miller. And I do think it's a fair question to ask, but obviously you want to have that opportunity to win the division and be at home, because if the Mariners end up getting a wild card, they'll be on the road first. They'll have to win a wild card series to potentially see home playoff baseball, and I would love to see it. I think a lot of people would love to see Houston not win the West for a change. It's been a long time in any full season. 2016 was the last time we saw someone other than the Astros win in a normal season, win the AL West, and that was Texas. So the Mariners, they're going to have their work cut out for them. As we said, these next 18 games against teams over 500, they're going to be tested. But who knows? Maybe we will be talking about the Mariners as the best team in the American League when we get to late October. All right, that's it for this edition of the Draft America podcast. As always, thanks for listening. Like, comment, subscribe. Support us generally, any way you can. But for Draft America, I'm Michael Seff, and we'll talk to you soon.